The emergency klaxon wailed across the bridge of the Valdarian flagship Crimson Dawn, its piercing shriek cutting through the tense silence like a blade through silk. Commander Zefka's four eyes darted between the holographic displays showing the approaching enemy fleet, each crimson but representing a vessel of the dreaded Korthak Empire. His scaled hands trembled as he gripped the command console, watching helplessly as death approached his people. "Status report," he commanded, though his voice betrayed the fear coursing through his veins like ice water. "Sir, we count 347 Korthak vessels approaching from the Nexus Gate," reported Navigation Officer Yilma, her normally steady voice cracking with barely contained terror. "They'll reach optimal firing range in 6 standard time units." Zefka's throat sac pulsed rapidly, a biological response his species couldn't control when facing mortal danger. The Valdarian Defense Coalition had assembled every available ship for this moment. 132 vessels representing 7 different species, all united against the common threat that had already consumed 12 star systems in the Outer Rim. Yet even their combined might seemed pathetically small against the approaching darkness. The Korthak were not merely conquerors, they were exterminators. They left no survivors, took no prisoners, and showed no mercy. Entire civilizations had been reduced to cosmic dust in their wake, their cultures and histories erased as if they had never existed. The few scattered survivors who had witnessed their attacks spoke of ships that blotted out the stars, weapons that turned planets into molten slag, and a hunger for destruction that seemed to transcend any logical military objective. "Communications, patch me through to all fleet commanders," Zefka ordered, straightening his shoulders despite the weight of impending doom. If these were to be his final moments, he would face them with whatever dignity remained to him. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the faces of his fellow commanders: Captain Thalrex of the Mentari Cruiser Squadron, Admiral Vexnari of the Crystalline Collective, Commander Jorik of the Hegemony Defense Force, and 4 others. Each face bore the same expression of grim determination mixed with the knowledge that they were about to die. "Fellow warriors," Zefka began, his voice carrying across the void to reach every bridge in the Coalition fleet. "We stand at the precipice of extinction. Our worlds lie defenseless behind us. Our people look to us for salvation we cannot provide. The mathematics of this engagement are simple. We will not survive the next few time units." A heavy silence followed his words. No one contradicted him because no one could. The tactical displays made the situation abundantly clear. Even if every coalition shot found its mark, even if they managed to destroy 2 Korthak vessels for every one they lost, it would not be enough. The enemy simply had too many ships, too much firepower, too much experience in the art of annihilation. Captain Thalrex was the first to break the silence, his mandibles clicking in what his species considered a gesture of respect. "Then, we die well, Commander. Our children will sing songs of this last stand." "Songs require singers," Admiral Vexnari interjected, her crystalline form refracting the bridge lights into prismatic patterns. "Who will remain to remember us when the Korthak have finished their work?" The question hung in the space between them like a funeral shroud. They all knew the answer. The Korthak took no prisoners, spared no witnesses. When they finished with the Coalition fleet, they would move on to the inhabited systems behind them. Valdara Prime, with its floating cities and crystal spires. New Mentera, where the great libraries held the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 generations. The Collective's home worlds, where living crystal formations had grown for millions of years, creating art that spanned continents. All of it would be gone. "Enemy fleet is adjusting formation," reported the tactical officer. "They're deploying in attack pattern 77 Alpha. Looks like they're planning to punch straight through our center line." Zefka studied the tactical display with the eye of a commander who had spent 30 years learning the art of war. The Korthak formation was textbook perfect, a spearhead of heavy battleships supported by waves of cruisers and destroyers, with their carrier wings positioned to exploit any gaps that opened in the Coalition line. It was a formation designed to maximize destruction while minimizing their own losses, the product of a military machine that had perfected the art of overwhelming force. "All ships, assume defensive formation Delta 9, he ordered. "Concentrate our heavy units at the center. If they want to punch through, We'll make them pay for every meter of space. The coalition fleet began to reshape itself, the various ships moving with the practiced precision of crews who knew their business. It was beautiful in its own way, Zefka thought, watching the graceful dance of starships preparing for their final battle. Each vessel represented the best of their respective civilizations. The artistic curves of Valdarian design, the crystalline elegance of collective ships, the brutal efficiency of hegemony vessels, the flowing organic lines of Mentari craft. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Outer Perimeter Scouts," the communications officer announced. "They report the Korthak Vanguard has begun preliminary bombardment of the asteroid field. They're not taking any chances with ambush positions." Of course they weren't. The Korthak had not built their empire by taking unnecessary risks. They had learned from every conquest, adapted their tactics with each new victory, and evolved into the most efficient killing machine the galaxy had ever seen. They would clear every possible hiding spot, eliminate every potential threat, and ensure that when they finally struck, nothing could surprise them. "Time to contact?" Zefka asked, though he already knew the answer. 4-time units and declining. 4-time units to live. 4-time units before the galaxy lost another piece of its diverse tapestry to the endless hunger of the Korthak war machine. Zefka closed his eyes and thought of his home world, of the sunrise over the jade seas where he had been born, of the small cottage where his mate and younglings waited for news that would never come. When he opened his eyes again, his resolve had crystallized into something harder than diamond. They might die, but they would not die cheaply. Every Korthak ship they destroyed was one fewer that could threaten the innocent worlds behind them. Every moment they delayed the enemy advance was another moment for civilian transports to reach the deep space evacuation zones. "All ships, this is Commander Zefka," he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. "In 4-time units, we face an enemy that has never known defeat. They come expecting another easy victory, another defenseless target to add to their collection. They are about to learn the cost of underestimating the free peoples of this galaxy." The response came immediately. A chorus of battle cries in 7 different languages, the combined voices of crews who had accepted their fate and chosen to face it with courage rather than despair. The Valdarian war chant mingled with Mentari throats singing, while hegemony percussion drums provided a rhythmic backdrop to the ethereal harmonies of the collective's crystal resonance. On the tactical display, the red dots continued their inexorable advance. 3-time units now. The Korthak fleet had spread into its final attack formation, a wall of metal and fury that stretched across half the system. Their ships were massive things, built for destruction rather than beauty, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements and shield projectors. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never encountered prey capable of fighting back. "Enemy fleet is charging weapons," the tactical officer reported. "We're detecting massive energy buildups across their entire line. All ships, prepare for impact," Zefka commanded. "Point defense systems to maximum, emergency power to forward shields. Helm, maintain current heading. We will not yield 1 meter of space without making them take it." The first salvo came like the wrath of an angry god. Thousands of energy bolts and plasma torpedoes crossing the void in a display of destructive power that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so terrifying. The coalition fleet's point defense systems worked frantically to intercept what they could, filling space with a defensive barrage of laser pulses and fragmenting warheads. It wasn't enough. It could never have been enough. The coalition line staggered under the impact, ships venting atmosphere and debris as the Korthak weapons found their marks. The cruiser Silver Wind took a direct hit from a plasma torpedo and simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a flash of blue-white light. The destroyer Quantum's Edge lost its entire forward section to a pair of heavy laser bolts, its crew dead before they even knew they were under attack. But the coalition ships gave as good as they got. Their return volley was smaller, but no less determined, concentrated fire from their heavy weapons finding gaps in the Korthak formations. A Korthak destroyer took multiple hits and exploded in a chain reaction of secondary explosions. Another heavy cruiser lost its main gun turret and fell back, trailing plasma from ruptured conduits. Direct hit on enemy flagship, the tactical officer reported with grim satisfaction. Their shields are down to 60%. Focus all fire on that target, Zefka ordered. If we can take out their command ship, we might disrupt their coordination. The second exchange came moments later, both fleets now within optimal firing range. The space between them became a hell's cape of energy beams, missile trails, and exploding ships. The coalition was giving a good account of themselves, but the mathematics of the engagement remained unchanged. For every Korthak vessel they destroyed, 2 coalition ships died in return. And then, just as it seemed the battle could not become any more intense, something impossible happened. "Commander," the sensor operator called out, his voice filled with confusion rather than fear. "I'm detecting new contacts emerging from hyperspace. Bearing 27 Mark IV, approximately 50,000 kilometers off the starboard flank." Zefka turned to look at the sensor display, expecting to see reinforcements for the Korthak fleet. What he saw instead made his blood freeze in his veins. The ships emerging from the swirling vortex of hyperspace were unlike anything in the known database. They were massive, yes, but not in the brutal, overwhelming way of Korthak vessels. These ships had clean lines and purposeful design, their hulls a strange mixture of metal and what appeared to be some kind of composite material. "How many ships?" he demanded. "Counting, 37 contacts confirmed, with more still emerging from the hyperspace vortex," the sensor operator replied. "Sir, these aren't Korthak designs. They don't match any known configuration in our database." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship's systems and the distant thunder of the ongoing battle. Who could these newcomers be? Another species drawn into the conflict? Mercenaries hired by one side or the other? Or something else entirely? "We're receiving a transmission from the lead unknown vessel," the communications officer announced. "They're broadcasting on standard emergency frequencies. The signal it's in galactic standard, but the accent is unlike anything I've ever heard." "Put it through," Zefka commanded. The view screen flickered and resolved into the image of a being unlike any Zefka had ever seen. It was bipedal, with pale skin and strange tufts of hair on its head. Its eyes were small and forward-facing, predatory in their focus, but there was something else there: intelligence, determination, and what might have been compassion. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Expeditionary Fleet," the creature said, its voice carrying an odd but unmistakable authority. "We've been monitoring your engagement with the Korthak Empire. Request permission to assist in the defense of this system." Humans. The name meant nothing to Zefka, but the offer of assistance meant everything. He found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. "This is Commander Zefka of the Valdarian Defense Coalition. We accept any assistance you can provide. But I must warn you, the Korthak have never been defeated. They will show no mercy to anyone who stands against them." The human's face shifted into what might have been a smile, though it revealed predatory teeth that sent an involuntary shiver through Zefka's scales. "Commander," Admiral Chin said, her voice carrying a note of cold steel that spoke of battles won and enemies broken, "we've been looking forward to meeting the Korthak for a very long time." The Korthak fleet commander, War Master Krexul, watched the unfolding battle from the command throne of his flagship Death's Embrace. His 6 arms moved with practiced efficiency across the control interfaces, coordinating the systematic destruction of the pathetic coalition forces with the same casual attention most beings might give to swatting insects. In his 300 years of service to the Empire, he had overseen the annihilation of 47 star systems, and this engagement promised to be no different from any other. The coalition was fighting with typical desperation, their ships throwing themselves into futile attacks that barely scratched the superior Korthak armor. Their tactics were predictable, their weapons inadequate, and their formations already beginning to crumble under the weight of superior firepower. Within the next few time segments, this pathetic resistance would be crushed, and his fleet could proceed to the real prize, the heavily populated systems that lay defenseless beyond this insignificant skirmish. "War Master," his tactical officer reported, his voice carrying the mechanical precision that marked all properly conditioned Korthak warriors. "Enemy resistance is diminishing according to projections. Coalition losses stand at 23% and rising. Our own losses remain minimal at 3%. Krexel's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The battle was proceeding exactly as the pre-engagement simulations had predicted. The Coalition's desperate gamble to stop them here would fail, just as every other attempt to resist the Empire had failed. Soon, their worlds would burn, their populations would be processed, and another sector of space would fall under the eternal dominion of the Korthak. Then, the hyperspace vortex opened. At first, Krexel dismissed the new contacts as irrelevant. Probably some merchant vessels that had stumbled into the battle zone, or perhaps a few Coalition reinforcements arriving too late to change the outcome. His attention remained focused on the systematic destruction of the enemy fleet, watching with professional interest as his heavy battleships carved through the Coalition's defensive line like claws through soft flesh. "War Master," the tactical officer called again, but this time there was something different in his voice. Uncertainty. In 3 centuries of conquest, Krexel had rarely heard uncertainty from his perfectly trained subordinates. "The new contacts, they are not matching any known ship configurations in our database." "Elaborate," Krexel commanded, finally, turning his attention to the sensor displays. 37 vessels, increasing to 46 contacts now confirmed. "They are large, War Master, comparable to our own heavy cruiser class, but their design principles are completely unknown. The hulls appear to be composed of an unusual metal alloy combined with some form of composite armor. Their weapon signatures are strange." Krexel studied the tactical display with growing interest. In all his years of conquest, he had cataloged the military capabilities of dozens of species. The Valdarians favored energy weapons and shields. The Mentari relied on kinetic bombardment and swarm tactics. The Crystalline Collective used exotic resonance weapons that could shatter molecular bonds. Each species had their preferred methods of warfare, their particular strengths and weaknesses that could be exploited. But these new ships defied easy categorization. Their energy signatures were unlike anything in the Korthak database, and their formation patterns suggested tactical doctrines that didn't match any known military philosophy. Most intriguingly, they showed no signs of the desperate haste that marked the Coalition forces. These newcomers moved with confidence, as if they owned the space they occupied. "Are they responding to our standard dominance broadcasts?" Krexel asked. "Negative, War Master. They have not acknowledged our demands for immediate surrender. In fact, they appear to be ignoring us entirely." "Ignoring them?" Krexel's upper arms twitched involuntarily, a sign of growing agitation. No species ignored the Korthak Empire. Fear, hatred, desperation. These were the normal responses to encountering the galaxy's apex predators. But casual dismissal? That was unprecedented. "War Master, we are detecting movement from the unknown fleet. They are advancing toward our starboard flank at high velocity. Their approach vector suggests they intend to engage our forces." The audacity was breathtaking. Krexel found himself experiencing an emotion he had not felt in decades: genuine curiosity. What species could be so supremely confident that they would willingly engage the full might of a Korthak battle fleet? Did they possess some secret weapon, some hidden advantage that made them believe they could succeed where everyone else had failed? "Signal the 3rd and 4th destroyer squadrons," he ordered. "Have them intercept these newcomers. I want to test their capabilities before committing more substantial forces." 24 Korthak destroyers peeled away from the main formation, their sleek forms cutting through space toward the approaching human fleet. These vessels represented the cutting edge of Korthak military technology, fast, heavily armed, and crewed by warriors who had never known defeat. They should be more than sufficient to deal with any conventional threat. Krexel watched with professional interest as the two forces closed to engagement range. The human ships made no attempt to evade or alter course, maintaining their steady advance as if the approaching destroyers were merely an inconvenience to be brushed aside. Either they were supremely confident in their abilities, or they were about to learn a fatal lesson in Korthak superiority. The destroyer squadron opened fire first, their plasma cannons and particle beams lashing out across the void in a display of destructive power that had reduced entire cities to smoking ruins. The barrage was precisely coordinated, each ship's targeting computer linked to the others to ensure maximum coverage and minimal overlap. It was a textbook assault that should have overwhelmed any defensive system. The human response was unlike anything Krexel had ever witnessed. Instead of the expected energy shields or defensive barriers, the human ships seemed to simply absorb the incoming fire. Their hulls glowed briefly where the plasma bolt struck, but showed no signs of damage. The particle beams that should have carved through their armor scattered harmlessly across some kind of deflective field that produced no visible distortion or energy signature. And then, the humans returned fire. The weapons that emerged from the human vessels defied conventional understanding. They appeared to be some form of kinetic projectile, but moving at velocities that approached significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles themselves seemed to be guided, adjusting their trajectories mid-flight to compensate for evasive maneuvers. When they struck, they didn't just penetrate armor. They seemed to phase through it entirely before exploding inside the target vessel's hull. 3 Korthak destroyers died in the first exchange, their hulls splitting open like overripe fruit as internal explosions tore them apart from within. The survivors immediately began evasive maneuvers, their captains reacting with the trained instincts of professional warriors who suddenly found themselves facing an unexpected threat. It didn't help. The second human volley was even more devastating than the first. Whatever guidance system controlled their projectiles seemed to anticipate the Korthak evasion patterns, leading their targets with uncanny precision. 7 more destroyers died in rapid succession, their death screams cut short as critical systems failed and life support systems vented into the vacuum. Impossible, Krexel whispered, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. No known technology can penetrate our armor that easily. The surviving destroyers had scattered, abandoning their attack formation in favor of individual evasive maneuvers. A few of the bolder captains attempted to close to point-blank range, hoping that proximity would negate whatever technological advantage the humans possessed. They died for their courage, their ships shredded by a new weapon that seemed to fire streams of coherent matter at relativistic velocities. In less than 2 time segments, 24 elite Korthak destroyers had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and escaping atmosphere. Not a single human ship showed any signs of damage. The bridge of death's embrace had fallen silent, the normally efficient chatter of status reports and tactical updates replaced by stunned quiet. Krexel's subordinates stared at their displays with expressions of disbelief, their carefully conditioned responses failing them in the face of something that simply should not exist. Analysis, Krexel demanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I want to know everything about these creatures. Their technology, their tactics, their weaknesses. Now, the tactical officer's claws moved frantically across his console, pulling up sensor data and running analysis protocols. War Master, the readings are confusing. Their ships appear to be constructed from materials we do not recognize. The projectile weapons use some form of exotic matter as ammunition, and their defensive systems seem to operate on principles that our sensors cannot fully analyze. Their ship designs suggest they are bipedal, oxygen-breathing humanoids, the intelligence officer added. The artificial gravity orientation and atmospheric readings confirm this. But their technology level is unprecedented. These are not merely advanced weapons. They represent an entirely different approach to warfare. Krexel absorbed this information with the analytical mind that had made him one of the Empire's most successful commanders. The humans had demonstrated technological superiority in at least 3 key areas: armor penetration, defensive systems, and targeting accuracy. Any one of these advantages might be overcome through superior numbers or tactical innovation. All 3 together represented a threat unlike any the Empire had faced in its 1,000-year history of expansion. War Master, the human fleet is broadcasting a general transmission to all forces in the system, the communications officer reported. Should we monitor their communications? Patch it through, Krexel ordered. He needed to understand these creatures, to learn their motivations and capabilities. Intelligence was the foundation of victory, and right now, he knew almost nothing about the force that had just effortlessly destroyed an entire destroyer squadron. The main view screen flickered, and resolved into the image of a human female, her pale features marked by the kind of calm confidence that came from absolute certainty in one's abilities. When she spoke, her voice carried across the tactical channel to every ship in both fleets. This is Admiral Chun of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. I am transmitting this message to all Korthak vessels in this system. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to surrender. This is your only warning. The bridge erupted in harsh laughter from Krexul's subordinates, the sound echoing off the metal walls like the chattering of scavenger insects. Surrender? The concept was so absurd that several junior officers had difficulty maintaining their composure. The Korthak Empire did not surrender. They conquered, they destroyed, they consumed, but they never, ever yielded to an inferior species. War Master, the communications officer said, still chuckling. Shall I transmit our standard response to surrender demands? Krexul considered for a moment. The standard response was a detailed description of exactly what the Empire intended to do to the enemy's homeworlds, populations, and cultural artifacts. It was designed to break the enemy's will to fight through the promise of inevitable doom. But something about the human admiral's demeanor suggested that psychological warfare might not be as effective as usual. No, he decided. Open a direct channel. I will speak to this human personally. The connection established itself quickly, and Krexul found himself looking directly into the eyes of the creature that had just demanded his surrender. Up close, he could see details that the general broadcast had missed. The predatory focus of those small eyes, the subtle tension in her posture that spoke of coiled violence, and something else that sent an unexpected chill through his combat-hardened consciousness. This human was not afraid, not even slightly. She looked at him the way he normally looked at his prey, with the calm assurance of a superior predator evaluating a potential meal. I am War Master Krexul of the Korthak Empire, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of conquest. You have made a grave error, human. Your species is unknown to us, which means you lack the experience to understand the magnitude of your mistake. We are the Korthak. We have conquered 47 star systems. We have never known defeat. And we do not surrender to inferior creatures who stumble into battles they cannot comprehend. The human admiral's expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed faintly amused by his declaration. When she spoke, her voice carried a casual tone that was somehow more unsettling than any threat could have been. War Master Krexul, she said, pronouncing his name with perfect accuracy. We know exactly who you are. We've been studying your empire for quite some time, learning your tactics, analyzing your technology, and preparing for this encounter. We know about the 47 systems you've destroyed. We know about the billions of innocent beings you've murdered. And we know why you think you're invincible. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of cold steel that made Krexul's combat instincts scream warnings he had never learned to heed. You're about to learn why you're wrong. Admiral Sarah Chun cut the communication link and turned to her tactical officer, Commander Rodriguez, whose dark eyes reflected the same cold determination that had carried humanity through a dozen impossible wars. Around them, the bridge of the UES Indomitable hummed with quiet efficiency, every station manned by veterans who had learned their trade in the crucible of humanity's most desperate hour. Assessment, Commander. Chun ordered, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from having stared death in the face so many times it had become an old acquaintance. Korthak fleet composition is exactly as our intelligence predicted, Rodriguez replied, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed the enemy formation in devastating detail. 347 vessels, organized into standard Imperial battle groups. Heavy battleships in the center, cruiser squadrons on the flanks, destroyer screens providing perimeter coverage. Their commanders are following doctrine precisely. Chun nodded, unsurprised. The Korthak had built their empire on overwhelming force and tactical predictability. It had worked for them for over 1,000 years, crushing every civilization that dared to resist. They had never needed to innovate because raw power had always been sufficient. They had never fought humanity. Signal the fleet, Chun commanded. Execute Protocol 7. I want those coalition ships clear of the engagement zone before we begin the real demonstration. Aye, Admiral. The human fleet began to move with a coordination that bordered on telepathic. Each ship knew its role. Each captain understood their part in a plan that had been refined through years of preparation and countless simulations. They had trained for this moment since the day humanity first learned of the Korthak Empire's existence. Since the day they had discovered that somewhere in the galaxy, a species existed that viewed genocide as a form of entertainment. On the bridge of the Crimson Dawn, Commander Zefka watched the human formation with growing amazement. The alien ships moved like a school of predatory fish, each vessel seeming to anticipate the movements of its companions without any visible communication. Their formation was unlike anything in standard tactical doctrine, loose enough to avoid concentrated fire, tight enough to provide mutual support, and organized in a three-dimensional matrix that maximized their firing angles while minimizing their profile. "Communications, patch me through to the human admiral," Zefka ordered. "I need to coordinate our withdrawal with their attack." The connection established quickly, and Admiral Chen's image appeared on his screen. Even in the midst of preparation for battle, she took the time to address his concerns with professional courtesy. "Commander Zefka, I need you to pull your forces back beyond the asteroid belt," she said without preamble. "We're about to demonstrate some technologies that work best without friendly ships in the engagement zone. Admiral, with respect, my fleet is prepared to fight alongside yours. We may not have your advanced weapons, but we can still contribute to—" "Commander," Chen interrupted gently, but with unmistakable finality, "you've already contributed more than you know. Your resistance here, your refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds, that's exactly the kind of courage the galaxy needs more of. But for the next phase, we need room to work. Trust me on this." Zefka found himself nodding before he could think better of it. There was something in the human admiral's tone, a quiet confidence that spoke of battles fought and won against impossible odds. "Very well, Admiral. All coalition ships, withdraw to coordinates 77 Mark 12. Maintain defensive formation, but give our allies the space they need." The coalition fleet began its withdrawal, limping away from the battle zone with their damaged ships trailing plasma and debris. Zefka watched his tactical display as the humans maintained their position, 46 ships against more than 300. The mathematics were still impossible, but somehow, the humans didn't seem to care about mathematics. On the Korthak flagship, War Master Krexel was reaching the same conclusion, though his reaction was considerably different. The human formation made no sense according to any tactical doctrine he knew. They were outnumbered almost 8-1. They had no obvious technological advantages beyond their strange weapons, and they were facing the most successful military force in galactic history. Yet they showed no signs of fear, desperation, or even concern. "War Master, shall we proceed with the standard victory formation?" his tactical officer asked. "The enemy fleet is small enough that we could simply surround them and destroy them through concentrated fire." Krexel considered the option. The standard victory formation was designed for exactly this situation, a vastly superior force eliminating a smaller enemy through overwhelming firepower. It had never failed in the past, and there was no logical reason it should fail now. But logic seemed to have little bearing on this engagement. The humans had already demonstrated weapons that shouldn't exist, and defensive systems that defied understanding. Proceeding with standard tactics might result in unnecessary casualties among his own forces. "No," he decided. "Deploy attack formation Theta 7. I want maximum firepower concentration on the enemy formation. Whatever technology they possess, it cannot withstand the combined might of the entire fleet." The Korthak fleet began to reshape itself, hundreds of ships moving into a formation designed to bring every weapon to bear on the human position simultaneously. It was overkill on a massive scale, the kind of overwhelming force that had reduced entire space stations to subatomic particles in previous engagements. The humans waited. They didn't retreat, didn't attempt evasive maneuvers, didn't even adjust their formation in response to the massive enemy deployment. They simply held position in the vast emptiness of space, their ships dark and silent except for the faint energy signatures of their defensive systems. "All ships, target the human formation," Krexel commanded. "Maximum firepower, full spectrum assault. I want nothing left but expanding gas and radiation. The Korthak fleet opened fire. 347 ships unleashed their fury simultaneously, filling the space between the two fleets with enough destructive energy to sterilize a small planet. Plasma cannons, particle beams, fusion torpedoes, gravity bombs, and exotic matter projectors all fired at once, creating a wall of annihilation that rushed toward the human formation at the speed of light. For a moment, the human ships disappeared entirely, swallowed by the overwhelming barrage that would have vaporized any normal fleet a dozen times over. Sensors screamed as they tried to penetrate the energy storm, and the view screens went white from the sheer intensity of the detonations. When the light faded, the humans were still there. Not only were they still there, they appeared to be completely undamaged. The storm of destruction that should have reduced them to their component atoms had simply dissipated around them, absorbed by whatever impossible technology protected their hulls. They sat in the vacuum like ancient monoliths, untouchable and serene, as if the entire Korthak fleet had just thrown pebbles at a mountain. The silence on the Korthak flagship was profound. Krexel stared at his displays, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The combined firepower of his entire fleet, weapons that had cracked planets and boiled away atmospheres, had been utterly ineffective against just 46 ships. Impossible, he whispered, the word escaping his mandibles like a prayer to gods that had clearly abandoned him. Check sensor readings. Verify target integrity. Sensors confirm, War Master, his tactical officer replied, his voice hollow with disbelief. All human vessels show 0 damage. Their energy signatures are actually stronger now than before the bombardment. It's as if they absorbed our attack energy and integrated it into their own systems. Before Krexel could respond to this impossible report, the humans finally moved. It wasn't the desperate charge of a cornered enemy or the careful maneuvering of a cautious force. The human ships simply accelerated forward, their formation maintaining perfect cohesion as they closed the distance to the Korthak fleet. There was something inexorable about their advance, like the movement of a glacier or the progression of entropy itself. Their closing to engagement range, the tactical officer reported unnecessarily. Everyone on the bridge could see the human ships growing larger on the view screens, their strange hulls reflecting the light of the system star with an almost organic quality. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Krexel commanded. Maintain firing solutions, but avoid close-range engagement until we can analyze their defensive capabilities. The Korthak fleet began to scatter, individual ships breaking formation to avoid whatever weapon system had allowed the humans to shrug off concentrated fleet bombardment. It was a tactical withdrawal disguised as strategic repositioning, but Krexel was experienced enough to recognize desperation when he felt it. The humans didn't pursue the fleeing ships. Instead, they selected individual targets with mechanical precision, each human vessel focusing its attention on a specific Korthak ship with the patience of a hunter stalking prey. The weapons they used now were different from the kinetic projectiles that had destroyed the destroyer squadron. These new armaments seemed to manipulate space itself, creating ripples in the fabric of reality that propagated outward from the human ships, like expanding spheres of controlled destruction. When these spatial distortions reached their targets, the Korthak ships simply ceased. Not exploded, not vaporized. They ceased to exist, as if reality itself had decided that those particular volumes of space should no longer contain matter. One moment, a heavy cruiser was there, its 1,000-meter hull bristling with weapons and armor. The next moment, there was nothing, not even debris to mark where it had been. War Master, we're losing ships faster than our computers can track, the tactical officer reported, his voice climbing toward panic. Whatever those weapons are, our armor provides no protection whatsoever. Shields, hull plating, structural reinforcement, none of it matters. They're erasing our vessels from existence. Krexel watched his tactical display with the horrified fascination of a warrior who had finally met a superior predator. Red icons representing Korthak ships were winking out one by one, each disappearance marking the death of hundreds of trained warriors and the destruction of irreplaceable military hardware. In the space of a few time segments, his overwhelming advantage had become a liability. The larger his fleet, the more targets the humans had to choose from. Signal general retreat, he ordered, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. All ships, withdraw to hyperspace coordinates. Emergency jump authorization granted. But, even as he gave the order, Krexel suspected it was already too late. The humans had demonstrated technological superiority that bordered on the godlike. If they chose to pursue his retreating ships, if they had faster-than-light capabilities that matched their conventional weapons, then escape might be nothing more than a comforting illusion. As if reading his thoughts, Admiral Chen's voice echoed across the Korthak fleet's communication channels, her transmission reaching every surviving ship simultaneously. This is Admiral Chen to all Korthak vessels. You are no longer welcome in this sector of space. You will withdraw immediately and never return. Any attempt to harm the Coalition worlds, any aggression toward the free peoples of this galaxy, will result in the complete extinction of your empire. This is not a threat. This is a promise. The words carried a weight that transcended mere military posturing. This was the voice of a species that had looked into the abyss and emerged victorious, that had faced extinction and chosen to fight rather than submit. It was the voice of humanity, and for the first time in his long career of conquest, War Master Krexel understood what it meant to be afraid. The Korthak fleet jumped to hyperspace, abandoning the system and their plans for conquest. Behind them, the Coalition forces remained safe under the protection of their mysterious saviors, while the human fleet maintained their position in perfect formation, silent guardians watching over worlds they had never seen but chosen to defend. In the space of a single engagement, the balance of galactic power had shifted forever. 3 standard days after the battle, Commander Zefka stood in the main conference chamber aboard the human flagship UES Indomitable, surrounded by the most advanced technology he had ever witnessed. The walls themselves seemed to be composed of some kind of programmable matter that shifted between transparency and opacity as needed, currently configured to display a stunning view of the nearby nebula in all its purple and gold glory. The furniture appeared to grow from the deck itself when required, reshaping to accommodate the various alien physiologies of the Coalition representatives. But what truly amazed him was the casual way the humans treated technology that seemed to border on magic. Admiral Chun sat at the head of an oval table that had simply materialized when the meeting began, reviewing data on a display that existed as coherent light floating in the air before her. Other human officers moved about the chamber with unconscious grace, their interactions with the ship's systems so seamless it was as if they were extensions of the vessel itself. The tactical analysis is complete, Admiral Chen announced, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. We've confirmed that the Korthak fleet has withdrawn beyond the outer system markers and jumped to hyperspace. Long-range sensors indicate they're retreating toward their core territories, but we'll maintain monitoring stations to ensure they don't return. Captain Thalrex of the Mentari fleet leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in what Zefka recognized as barely contained curiosity. Admiral Chun, with the greatest respect, we must ask, who are you? Your species is unknown to our databases. Your technology surpasses anything in recorded galactic history, and you appeared at precisely the moment when our cause seemed lost. Admiral Chun exchanged glances with her senior staff, a silent communication that spoke of shared experiences and difficult decisions. When she looked back at the assembled Coalition commanders, her expression was carefully neutral. The answer to that question is more complicated than you might expect, she said. But I think you deserve the truth, especially after the courage you showed in facing the Korthak fleet. She gestured, and the air above the table shimmered into a 3-dimensional map showing their current location in the galaxy. Zefka recognized the major star systems and trade routes, but was surprised to see vast sections of space marked as unexplored or uninhabited. This is how your galactic maps show our region of space, Chen continued, highlighting an area that encompassed several dozen star systems on the rim of known civilization. Uninhabited, too dangerous for exploration, marked as a zone to be avoided by all sensible travelers. Admiral Vexnari of the Crystalline Collective made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, her species' expression of surprise. But That region contains dozens of potentially habitable worlds. The survey data suggested atmospheric toxins and unstable stellar formations, but surely, the survey data was accurate when it was taken, Chen interrupted gently. Nearly 2,000 years ago, that entire sector was uninhabitable. The systems were locked in a massive war between two extinct civilizations. The creators and the devourers fought for over a century, using weapons that made the Korthak arsenal look like children's toys. When it ended, there was nothing left but poisoned worlds and stellar graveyards. The holographic display shifted, showing the same region but with additional data overlays. Now the star systems pulsed with life, connected by trade routes and communication networks that spoke of a thriving civilization. But that was then, Chen continued. Over the past 8 centuries, we've been working to heal those worlds. Atmospheric processors, stellar rehabilitation, ecosystem reconstruction. It's been the greatest terraforming project in galactic history. And it's been our home. Commander Jorik of the Hegemony Defense Force spoke for the first time, his gravelly voice reflecting the confusion they all felt. You've been living in the dead zone for 800 years? But the radiation levels, the stellar instabilities, were significant challenges, yes, Chen acknowledged. But humanity has always thrived on significant challenges. When we first arrived in this galaxy, we were refugees from a war that had consumed our original home. We had no allies, no established territories, and no one willing to help us establish a new civilization. The dead zone was the only place we could settle without displacing other species. She paused, letting that information sink in before continuing. It took us 3 centuries just to make the first world habitable. Another 2 centuries to establish a stable population base. But we learned, we adapted, and we grew. And all that time, we watched the galaxy beyond our borders. Watched and did nothing while the Korthak expanded their empire, Zefka said, though he immediately regretted the accusation in his voice. These humans had just saved his people from extinction. He had no right to judge their past actions. But Admiral Chen didn't seem offended. If anything, she looked sad. We watched and prepared, Commander. Do you think the weapons you saw today were developed overnight? The defensive systems that protected our ships from the Korthak bombardment? The spatial manipulation technology that allowed us to erase their vessels from existence? The holographic display changed again, showing what appeared to be massive industrial complexes orbiting dead stars, their construction clearly spanning decades or even centuries. Zefka could see dry docks containing ships that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined, research stations the size of small moons, and manufacturing facilities that seemed to process raw stellar material into finished goods. We've spent the last 300 years preparing for this moment, Chen explained. Every Korthak conquest, every act of genocide, every innocent world burned to ash. We recorded it all. We studied their tactics, analyzed their technology, and developed countermeasures for every weapon in their arsenal. We built a military force specifically designed to stop them. But why wait so long? Admiral Vexnari asked, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. If you possessed such capabilities, millions of beings might have been saved if you had acted sooner. The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Zefka could see the pain it caused the human officers. Admiral Chun was silent for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the chamber's walls. Because we weren't ready, she said finally. And because we had learned the cost of acting without proper preparation. Our original civilization was destroyed because we went to war before we fully understood our enemy. We faced an opponent that seemed inferior to us in every way. Smaller, less advanced, apparently primitive. We thought victory would be simple. Her voice carried the weight of old grief, the kind of pain that came from hard-won wisdom. We were wrong. That apparently primitive enemy had developed weapons we couldn't understand, tactics we couldn't counter, and a level of commitment we couldn't match. By the time we realized our mistake, our home worlds were burning and our fleets were broken. The survivors who escaped to this galaxy swore an oath. Never again would humanity go to war unprepared. The chamber fell silent as the coalition commanders absorbed this revelation. These humans were not the mysterious saviors they had appeared to be. They were survivors of their own apocalypse, refugees who had spent centuries preparing to ensure that what happened to them would never happen to anyone else. So you waited, Zefka said, beginning to understand. You watched and prepared until you were absolutely certain you could win. We waited until we were absolutely certain we could win without risking another species extinction, Chin corrected. The Korthak Empire represents the same kind of existential threat that destroyed our original civilization. If we had engaged them prematurely and failed, they would have turned their attention to our territory. 200 billion humans would have died, and the galaxy would have lost its only hope of stopping the Korthak advance. Commander Rodriguez, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. The decision wasn't made lightly. We have entire departments dedicated to monitoring the galactic situation, thousands of analysts who track every Korthak movement. We've identified over a dozen intervention points where we could have acted, could have saved millions of lives. But each time, our projections showed unacceptable risks of failure. Until now, Chen added. 3 days ago, our strategic computers finally achieved consensus. The Korthak fleet composition, their tactical deployment, the strength of coalition resistance. Everything aligned to create a scenario where we could demonstrate our capabilities with minimal risk of escalation or retaliation. The truth was both inspiring and terrifying. These humans had turned themselves into the galaxy's hidden guardians, spending centuries preparing for a single moment when they could emerge from the shadows and stop an ancient evil. But their success had come at the cost of watching countless innocents die while they perfected their plans. What happens now? Captain Thalrex asked. Will humanity take its place among the galactic community? Will you share your technologies with the coalition species? Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time since the meeting began, she seemed relaxed. That's exactly what we're hoping for, Captain. We've been isolated for too long, cut off from the rest of galactic civilization by necessity. The Korthak threat was the only thing preventing us from making contact, and now that threat has been neutralized. She gestured again, and the holographic display showed new trade routes opening between human space and coalition territories, communication networks extending across previously empty regions, and joint research stations where different species could work together. We have much to offer, she continued. Our terraforming techniques could restore dead worlds throughout the galaxy. Our medical technology could eliminate diseases that have plagued your species for millennia. Our manufacturing capabilities could provide resources for reconstruction projects that would dwarf anything previously attempted. And in return? Zefka asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. In return, we ask for something we've been missing for 8 centuries, Chen replied. We ask for friendship, for the chance to be part of something larger than ourselves, for the opportunity to help build a galaxy where species like the Korthak can never again threaten innocent civilizations. She stood, and the other humans followed suit, their movements carrying the unconscious coordination of a unified purpose. The war is over, commanders. The Korthak Empire will not trouble this sector again. But the peace that follows, that's something we'll have to build together. As the coalition representatives began to file out of the chamber, each lost in thought about the revelations they had heard, Zefka lingered for a moment. He wanted to say something about the courage it had taken to remain hidden while others suffered, about the wisdom of patience in the face of injustice, about the hope that these mysterious humans represented for the future of galactic civilization. Instead, he simply nodded to Admiral Chun and said, "Thank you for waiting until you were ready. The galaxy is safer because of your sacrifice." Chen nodded back, and in her eyes, Zefka saw the reflection of a species that had learned hard lessons and chosen to use that knowledge in service of others. Whatever else happened in the years to come, he knew that humanity would stand between the innocent and the darkness, ready to defend those who could not defend themselves. The age of human isolation was ending. The age of galactic cooperation was about to begin. 6 months after the battle that would later be called the liberation of Nexus Point, the galaxy had begun to transform in ways that no one could have predicted. The defeat of the Korthak Empire had sent shockwaves through every sector of known space, toppling the assumptions that had governed interstellar politics for over a millennium. Species that had cowered in the shadows for generations were emerging to reclaim their ancestral territories, while others were forming new alliances based on the hope that cooperation might prevent future genocides. At the heart of this transformation was Terra Nova, the first human world to open its doors to galactic visitors. Commander Zefka stood on the observation deck of the Crimson Dawn, now orbiting this remarkable planet, and struggled to comprehend what he was seeing through the viewports. The world below was impossibly green and blue, its continents wreathed in white clouds that spoke of a thriving ecosystem. But what amazed him most was the obvious evidence of terraforming on a scale that dwarfed anything previously attempted. The atmospheric processors are working at 97% efficiency, reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, the human xenobiologist who had volunteered to serve as his guide. When we arrived 8 centuries ago, this world had a methane atmosphere and surface temperatures that could melt lead. Now it's home to over 400 million beings from 17 different species. Zefka turned away from the viewport to study his guide with the same fascination he had been devoting to the planet below. Dr. Vasquez was typical of the humans he had met since the battle. Competent, friendly, and possessed of a casual confidence that suggested she had never met a problem she couldn't solve given enough time and resources. Like all her species, she treated the impossible as merely challenging. 17 species? He asked. I was under the impression that humanity had isolated itself from galactic contact. We isolated ourselves from galactic politics, she corrected with a smile. But refugees from the Korthak expansion have been finding their way to our territory for decades. We've never turned anyone away, regardless of species or situation. Terra Nova is actually one of our more diverse worlds. Some of the outer colonies are almost entirely composed of beings whose home systems were destroyed by the Empire. This revelation added another layer to Zefka's growing understanding of human civilization. Far from the militant isolationists he had initially imagined, they had been quietly providing sanctuary for the Korthak Empire's victims while simultaneously preparing to stop the genocide at its source. It was a level of long-term thinking that impressed him almost as much as their military technology. Would it be possible to meet some of these refugees? He asked. My government is trying to understand the full scope of the Korthak expansion, and first-hand accounts would be invaluable. Of course, Dr. Vasquez replied. In fact, I think you'll be surprised by some of the stories you hear. Humanity isn't the only species that's been preparing for this day. An hour later, Zefka found himself in a conference room that exemplified human design philosophy, functional but comfortable, with transparent walls that provided stunning views of the planet's surface. Across from him sat 3 beings whose very presence challenged everything he thought he knew about the recent galactic situation. The first was Keth Moore, a Zalithian whose crystalline exoskeleton marked him as a member of a species that had supposedly been extinct for over 2 centuries. The second was Captain Uramel of the Astari Confederation, whose people had reportedly been eliminated by the Korthak Empire 50 years ago. The third was Professor Zixtel of the Quantum Collective, a species whose home systems had been the first to fall when the Empire began its current expansion cycle. Gentlemen, Dr. Vasquez said, settling into her chair with characteristic human directness, Commander Zefka is here representing the Coalition Council. They're trying to understand the true impact of Korthak expansion and the current state of galactic civilization. Kethmore spoke first, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance typical of his people. Commander, what the galaxy thinks it knows about Korthak expansion is only partially accurate. Yes, they destroyed our worlds. Yes, they murdered billions of our people. But they didn't achieve complete genocide, despite their claims to the contrary. How is that possible? Zefka asked. Coalition intelligence reports indicated total planetary sterilization in every system the Empire conquered. Because that's what the Empire wanted you to believe, Captain Uramel replied, her antennae twitching in what he recognized as bitter amusement. Terror is as much a weapon as plasma cannons or gravity bombs. If other species believed that resistance was futile, that the Korthak always achieved total victory, then they would be more likely to surrender without fighting. Professor Zixtel leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the room's lighting in complex patterns. The truth is more complicated. The Korthak Empire is efficient at destruction, but they're not particularly thorough when it comes to verification. They destroy obvious population centers, eliminate military resistance, and then move on to their next target. But there are always survivors, small communities that escape notice, deep space habitats that avoid detection, research stations hidden in asteroid fields. And over the decades, those survivors have been making their way to human territory, Dr. Vasquez added. Sometimes individually, sometimes in small groups, occasionally as intact communities that manage to preserve some of their cultural heritage. Zefka absorbed this information with growing amazement. How many survivors are we talking about? Conservative estimates suggest around 40 million beings from species the Empire claims to have exterminated, Kethmore replied. And that's just the ones who've made it to human space. There are probably millions more scattered throughout the galaxy, hiding in remote systems or living as refugees among other civilizations. The implications were staggering. If these numbers were accurate, then dozens of supposedly extinct species might be capable of rebuilding their civilizations, given proper support and protection. The Korthak Empire's genocidal efficiency had been significantly exaggerated, whether through deliberate propaganda or simple overconfidence. But that's only part of the story, Captain Uramel continued. The survivors didn't just flee to human territory seeking shelter. Many of us have been actively working with human intelligence services, providing information about Korthak tactics and technology, helping to plan for the day when resistance would finally be possible. You've been spying on the Empire? Zefka asked, his respect for human strategic planning climbing to new heights. More than spying, Professor Zixtel replied with obvious pride. Some of our people have been infiltrating Korthak-controlled systems, documenting their activities, and, in a few cases, actively sabotaging their operations. Nothing dramatic enough to provoke retaliation, but enough to slow their expansion and gather intelligence on their capabilities. Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed the galactic map with new overlay data. Now Zefka could see a network of hidden bases, communication relays, and intelligence-gathering stations that spanned much of known space. The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Humanity and their allies had been conducting the largest espionage campaign in galactic history without anyone realizing it. The battle at Nexus Point wasn't humanity's first intervention, she explained. It was simply the first open intervention. We've been conducting covert operations against the Korthak Empire for over a century, working to limit their expansion while we completed our preparations. Covert operations? Zefka repeated, feeling as if his understanding of recent history was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. Kethmore's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a smile. Commander, why do you think the Empire's expansion slowed so dramatically over the past 50 years? Why did their supposedly unstoppable war machines suddenly start experiencing equipment failures, supply shortages, and communication breakdowns? The answer hit Zefka like a physical blow. You've been sabotaging them. We've been creating opportunities for their potential victims to escape or prepare defenses, Captain Uramel corrected diplomatically. Nothing that could be directly traced back to human territory, nothing that would provoke premature retaliation, but enough to buy time for our preparations to be completed. Professor Zixtel activated another section of the holographic display, showing detailed analyses of Korthak military technology. My people specialized in quantum mechanics before our supposed extinction. For the past 30 years, we've been developing quantum interference devices specifically designed to disrupt Korthak shield systems and navigation computers. The weapons failures that plagued their recent campaigns weren't accidents. And my people have been working on biological agents that target the specific neurochemistry of Korthak command staff, Kethmore added. Nothing lethal, you understand, but substances that can cause temporary confusion, memory loss, or impaired decision-making. Very useful when delivered through their air recycling systems during critical battle phases. Zefka sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what he was learning. The galactic community had spent decades believing that they were alone in facing the Korthak threat, that no one possessed the power or will to stand against the Empire's expansion. In reality, a hidden alliance of supposedly extinct species had been waging a shadow war for generations, preparing for the day when open resistance would finally be possible. "How many species are involved in this alliance?" he asked. "Officially? None, Dr. Vasquez replied with a grin that revealed her species' predatory heritage. "Unofficially, we've been working with representatives from 23 different civilizations, 12 of which are officially extinct according to Korthak propaganda." The holographic display shifted again, showing what appeared to be a vast industrial complex hidden in the depths of an unnamed nebula. Ships moved between the various installations like schools of fish, their designs clearly representing multiple technological traditions working in harmony. "This is Sanctuary Station," Professor Zixtel explained. "It's where we've been coordinating our resistance efforts and developing the technologies that made the liberation of Nexus Point possible." "The quantum phase weapons that erased Korthak ships from existence? Those were based on theoretical work originally developed by my people, refined through collaboration with human engineers and Zolithian crystalline manipulation techniques. The spatial distortion fields that protected our fleet from the Korthak bombardment," Captain Uramel added. "Those incorporated a starry dimensional folding technology that we thought was lost when our homeworlds burned." Zefkar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly cooperative effort between multiple species, pooling their knowledge and resources in pursuit of a common goal. The technological achievements that had seemed impossible when displayed by the human fleet suddenly made sense when viewed as the product of dozens of different scientific traditions working together. "What happens now?" he asked. "Will this alliance continue to operate in secret, or are you planning to reveal yourselves to the rest of the galaxy?" "That depends largely on the galactic community's reaction to recent events," Dr. Vasquez replied diplomatically. "We've been hidden for so long that integration into galactic society will be a gradual process. But we're hoping that the Coalition Council will be willing to work with us in building a more stable and secure future." Keth Moore leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the hope that had sustained his people through centuries of exile. "Commander, we've spent generations preparing for war. Now we want to spend the next few generations building peace. But we can't do it alone. We need partners, allies, species willing to work together to ensure that something like the Korthak Empire can never arise again. And we need to do it carefully," Captain Uramel added. "The Empire may be defeated, but the conditions that allowed it to exist in the first place, the isolation between species, the lack of cooperation on galactic security issues, the tendency for civilizations to focus only on their own immediate interests, those conditions still exist." Professor Zixtel activated a final section of the holographic display, showing a projection of what galactic civilization might look like in the coming decades. Trade routes connected previously isolated systems. Joint research stations tackled problems too complex for any single species, and cooperative defense networks ensured that no civilization would ever again face extinction alone. "This is what we're hoping to build," he said. "Not a human empire or a dominant alliance, but a true galactic community where diversity is strength and cooperation is the foundation of security." Zefka studied the projection with growing excitement. It was an ambitious vision, perhaps impossibly so, but these beings had already achieved the impossible once. If they could defeat the Korthak Empire through careful planning and cooperation, then perhaps they could also build the kind of galactic civilization that had existed only in the dreams of philosophers and idealists. "I think," he said slowly, "that the Coalition Council will be very interested in discussing this proposal. And I suspect that many other species will be eager to join an alliance that has already proven its effectiveness." Dr. Vasquez smiled, and for the first time since meeting the humans, Zefka saw genuine relief in her expression. Then, perhaps the galaxy is finally ready for peace. As the meeting concluded and the various participants began to file out, Zefka remained behind for a moment, staring at the holographic projection of a possible future. The battle at Nexus Point had ended one age of galactic history and begun another. The age of fear was ending, and the age of hope was about to begin. And at the heart of it all stood humanity, no longer the mysterious saviors who had descended from the stars, but partners in the greatest construction project the galaxy had ever attempted. They had spent centuries preparing for war, but their greatest victory would be measured not in ships destroyed or enemies defeated, but in the civilizations they helped to rebuild and the peace they helped to preserve. The stars themselves seemed brighter as Zevkov finally left the conference room, carrying with him the knowledge that the galaxy's darkest hour was ending, and its brightest days still lay ahead.